as a reminder of several very simple Hindu stories that allow a very important question to be asked of us. The first is that story about the Hindu couple who were of the Brahmin caste, and the husband of the couple, although he kept to the basic rules of his caste and faith, he was an unlettered and an uncultured man. But on the contrary, his wife was well educated and imbued in the culture of her society. Now, once a year, a troupe of performers would come round to their village to perform and enact the stories of the great epic, the Ramayana. So, on one occasion, the wife insisted that her husband go along to these performances. So, being a dutiful husband, he went on to the performance, and after having had a day of hard work, of course, he was very tired, so as soon as the performance started, he went fast asleep. He didn't see anything of the performance at all, but afterwards it was the custom for someone to go around and hand out sweetmeats to all of the audience. So when the person was coming around to hand out the sweetmeats and saw this sleeping man, he just popped a sweet into his mouth. So when the husband went home, the wife asked him, well, how was the performance? And he ruminated on it a little bit. He said, oh, well, it was quite sweet. So the next night the performance was on again, and the wife insisted that her husband go along to the next one, and so he did. But of course, after another hard day of work, he sat down and immediately went to sleep again. But a young boy who was looking for a place to sit to see the performance noticed this sleeping man and took the opportunity to sit on his shoulders to see the performance. So after the performance was over and the husband woke up and went home, and his wife said, well, how was the performance? And the husband ruminated and said, well, it was quite heavy. But she was a bit suspect at this time, but she insisted he go on the next night to the performance. And so he did, but this time he didn't even bother to sit down. He lay down in the aisle and went straight to sleep even before the performance started. But it so happened that there was a dog wandering around and came round and saw this snoring man and peed in his mouth. So when the husband went home and the wife said to him, well, how was the performance tonight? And he rolled it around. He said, well, it was quite salty. So by this time, the wife was very suspect about this whole thing. So she said, well, tonight I'm coming with you, you're coming with me to the performance, and I threaten you with divorce if you don't stay awake. So she insisted that they sit in the front row, right in front of the place where the performance was being, on the stage, and they sat there. And when the performance started, the husband was absolutely enthralled. He was completely absorbed in this wonderful enactment of this part of the Ramayana. And just at the point where this story was being enacted, where the monkey god Honeymoon had to dive into the ocean to get the gold ring that was going to save the queen, all of a sudden, for the husband, the stage became the ocean. And he jumped up from in his seat and he said, Honeymoon, I'll help you. And he dived into the ocean and he retrieved the gold ring, and he came out and he said, "Here you are, Honeymoon." Well, the audience were absolutely astonished and astounded. They couldn't believe what they had witnessed. And after that, they treated the husband like some holy wise man. And you know, that's exactly what he became. And the other story is that story about also the Hindu husband and wife, but they were of the lower caste. In fact, the husband was just a laborer, and he would take work wherever he could, breaking bricks on the side of the road. But work was not very forthcoming in those days. Times were hard. But the wife, in fact, was a chambermaid in the women's quarters of the palace, of the king's palace. And now it so happened that one day the wife got very ill, and she said, "I cannot go to work today, but we need to put bread on the table, so you'll have to dress up as a woman and go and do my work." So this is what the husband did. He wrapped himself in a sari, and he went off to do his wife's work as a chambermaid in the palace. But as he was mopping one of the passageways, it so happened that the princess of the realm was coming out from her bath, and she was naked. And when the husband caught sight of this magnificent naked creature with alabaster skin and perfect contours, he was absolutely smitten. And from that moment on, he could not get the thought of this beautiful being out of his mind. So his wife noticed that he went around sighing and doleful. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. So finally the wife pressed him as to what it was that was going on with him. And of course he had to admit what it was. And she said, "Oh, you stupid man." Yeah, but of course it didn't alter his state of being at all. He still pined and couldn't eat and couldn't sleep. All he could think of with this beautiful, beautiful alabaster body. So the wife was totally desperate because she thought she was going to lose her husband. He would just fade away. So she decided that she would go to the princess and tell her, beg her, please, wouldn't she please see the husband, put him out of his misery in some way. But when the wife went to the princess, she was very sympathetic to the cause, but she said, in our caste, it's not possible for me to speak to a man. So how can I speak to him? And then the princess had a thought. Well, you know that I go to the temple on every sacred day to give out alms to all the monks. What about if your husband dresses himself as a monk and goes to the temple on that day, and then as I pass and give alms, I'll be able to speak with him. So the wife thought this was a wonderful idea. So she went back to her husband and told her what had been planned, and the husband was absolutely over the moon. At last he was going to see his beloved and even speak to her. So he dressed himself up in the robes of the monk, and on the appointed day he went to the temple, and there were all the monks and the sadhus lined up in lotus position, and so he took his place amongst them in the line. And while they were sitting there, they were all chanting. They were chanting Rama, Rama, Rama. So the husband sat down and crossed his legs, and he was sitting there tense and nervous, thinking, I can't wait, she's coming. I can almost hear the carriage coming down the roadway. But then, after a while, something had happened. The Rama started to swirl around him and somehow enter into him as the sound of the Rama. And so he started intoning it himself. Rama. An amazing thing happened. All of his thoughts and the thought of the princess totally disappeared. And the princess came. And she started to walk along the lines of the monks, and she came to the husband, and as she'd been told, she bent down and whispered in his ear, I'm here. I have the chance to speak with you. But the husband was not there. He was away with Rama. So the princess tried once again, whispered in his ear, but there was absolute no response. So she moved on to the next monks to give alms to them, and then she left. And then the monks having received, and the sadhus having received their gifts from the princess, they got up and left, and there was the husband, is still sitting there. Rama. And then the wife came along looking for her husband. What had happened to him? She tried to rouse him, but he couldn't be roused. Rama. So she left him sitting there in his estate. The very next morning, when there were those who came to worship, they found the body of the husband. His soul had left, leaving just his form sitting. So the very important question that arises from these two stories is, what is the difference between them? What is the difference between that which is indicated in the first story and that which is indicated in the second? What is our experience? What is the difference between these two? Could we say losing ourself in life, and in the second, losing ourself in transcendence, so to speak? What do they bring about? What's your experience? Why do they differ?
One is a fantasy and one is real.
Right on. One is so-called off with the fairies, and the other is real. Where does it place us then? Is there a choice? What have you found? Can we remain in a state of transcendence, off with the fairies? Can we live a life like that?
And it'll get snuffed away.
Yes. Some of us have tried. Did it work? Didn't work for me. Does it?